Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Alternative Ideas podcast. My name is Jonathan Brush. I'm the CEO of Unbound, and I'm joined today by David. David, introduce yourself.
My name is David Rethemeyer. I do a lot of different things for Unbound, but one of the things that I get to do is be the IT director and have my eye on all things information technology and security. And so part of the reason that we came together to do this is that we have slightly different perspectives on technology and specifically on AI.
And if you're watching this live, you can see that some of those are slightly generational differences in technology and AI. But in this inaugural episode of Alternative Ideas, we wanted to just give a little quick introduction of why we're doing this. And here's what's going on. We work in education. Now, we work in non-traditional education, and our corner of education actually moves pretty quickly. But education, and particularly higher education, typically moves at the speed that makes glaciers look like speed demons. And one of the things that caught my attention was starting about January, I watched AI in the form of ChatGPT come in and totally just disrupt education in a way that I hadn't seen since the internet. And I started my career right as the internet was causing that kind of disruption. And so it quickly became apparent that it would be educational malpractice for us not to take a hard look at AI and what it means. Now, the alternative ideas comes from the fact that I think to some extent, while David and I look at this differently, we share something in common, which is we see a lot of potential in AI and a lot of exciting things. And simultaneously, we see a lot of terrifying things and things that are worrisome. And if you go and look around, you will find that everybody picks one of those camps to be in. It's either going to be Terminator redo, and we're going to all die because AI is going to kill us. And there's lots of really interesting people saying that. Or it's like AI can do no wrong, and anything we can do, we should do. And so the idea of this podcast was maybe to take a look at that. And I don't know if we're looking for a middle road, but maybe a third way would be a better example or a better illustration of thinking about AI, because my thesis, and I think David's thesis as well, is that AI is going to disrupt your world, whether you like it or not. You may not like the internet, but the internet still defines a lot of the world that you live in. And to be able to live well and to thrive in that kind of world, then you need to have an idea of what's going on. And so this is the AI podcast for people who don't really care about AI, perhaps, but know that it may have an impact in your life. And so look at some things. So with that, David, we're going to start our first segment here with just looking at some of the news, because the AI news moves incredibly fast. I think you could make a full-time job. And in fact, it looks like a lot of people on YouTube are making a full-time job of just reporting daily on the AI updates. And it's pretty breathtaking. So this is by no means a comprehensive list of the latest AI news, but it's the news that caught our attention. So David, you had some news stories that caught your attention in the last few days. So why don't you kick us off here?
Yeah, so in particular, I wanted to talk about the biggest thing that probably a lot of you have heard about if you are listening in on any sort of consumer news, is that Apple just had a very big conference as of when we're recording this yesterday. They just had their conference called WWDC, not to be confused with WWJD. We're talking about Silicon Valley, not the Bible Belt. But they had this conference where more targeted at developers. It's their worldwide developers conference where they're showing off a lot more as far as their very high-end stuff that is projects that are not necessarily going to be coming to your hands super quickly. They have some things, for example, like introducing some new things for the iPad that might be coming out then. But really, they're primarily focusing on the bleeding edge of technology that's coming very soon, and they're marketing it to developers so that they can start getting excited about it, developing things for it, and hopefully pushing technology forward. That's their goal. And at this latest conference, the big headline thing, the one more thing from Mr. Tim Cook, was their spatial computing headset is what they called it. Let's see here. I actually didn't have the article pulled up, so I should
David, is this like the Google Glass redo here?
So it's kind of like Google Glass. It's interesting that you make that comparison because a lot of people have forgotten about Google Glass. Google Glass, for those of you who may not remember it, was the set of glasses that were made by Google that had a computer on the side of it and a camera that would allow you to walk around, see the world around you, but also have computer projections in there.
And it was pitched as like the thing, like this, what was it? Augmented reality? Was that the term that was used? So it's hailed as the next big thing by pundits and by the tech press and all those people. Wearables the next big thing, and it's basically panned by consumers. I mean, it was a tremendous flop in terms of the consumer space. So, what do you see as a difference, other than the fact that it's Apple? So it's hard to think of Apple designing a product that has that kind of crash worthiness, but
yeah. So there's a few different differences. I want to back up a little bit and explain the difference in augmented reality, because when augmented reality first came out, when Google Glass first came out, people didn't really understand that as a concept, especially with the difference between augmented and virtual reality. Now, virtual reality headsets are much more common. Have been millions sold in the US, so you might be a little bit more familiar, where those are just headsets that you wear where there's a screen on the inside and that's all you're looking at whenever you have on this headset. Augmented reality headsets are specifically designed to have some sort of mechanism, either by just being transparent in the front or by having cameras that let you see on the outside, to have it so that there is a level of interaction with the outside world that is mixed with the screen that you're looking at that is displaying computer information. So it's also known as mixed reality. So there is both the virtual element of the screen as well as the real element of interacting with the real world, and having both of them visible to you at the same time.
It's like, you'd be walking down the street and the Google line would be basically projected in the sidewalk for where you need to go. I mean, that's kind of the idea, right?
Right. Yes. And so that was their main focus, which at the time, because Google Glass came out, I think about a decade ago at this point, I think it was honestly, in my opinion, an excellent product concept, but it was ahead of its time, because some of the big reasons that people were concerned about it were they were saying, oh, well, we're not going to be able to know when people are recording with it. And people were getting kicked out of movie theaters for having them on because they thought, oh no, somebody's going to record with this. And they were just so concerned about privacy things at that point. But to be honest, things have progressed so much with cameras being everywhere and in such small form factors that, to be honest, I think if they brought it back today, it would be a much more successful concept. And I kind of have a suspicion they might.
So yeah, that's what I remember too. Is like people were like totally weirded out by the fact that you could be looking at me and recording at the same time. So I want to test something here, David. So okay. If you had a chance to have Google Glasses now, would that be a problem for you? Like, in other words, you're saying that your thesis is that now people are just so used to getting recorded that Google Glass would be successful. Would that be something that you'd be like, that'd be cool, I'd try that?
Personally, for myself, if somebody literally just gave it to me at no cost, absolutely, I would try it out for sure at this point. Whether it would be something that it becomes a part of my daily life where I would put my prescription lenses into the Google Glass and wear them on a daily basis, I'm not sure. I would have to kind of learn more about what exactly they did and figure out what sort of utility they actually have, and frankly, how intrusive they are, not just in the privacy aspect of things, of how much they're recording the world around me, but also how much they are just popping up information. So I think if I had just a computer on my head that was constantly bringing up information about, even if I was going for a walk in the woods and it was trying to tell me all about the tree species that are there, that might be interesting in some scenarios. But in a lot of scenarios, I'm just wanting to go for a walk in the woods because I want to be away from computers and not have things pop up in front of my head. So it would definitely be something I'd be interested to try, but I would be cautious as far as immediately full on adopting it.
Yeah, I was curious because it still sounds just as terrifying to me as it does when they introduce it the first time. At least if somebody's recording with their phone, like, they got the phone, they're waving it at me and I know they're recording it, I think it's still creepy to think that you'd be looking at somebody and not knowing whether you're being recorded or not. Although I guess they could fix that with like a light or something. But yeah, I'm a little bit like you, but maybe to an extreme, which is, I'm generally looking for solutions to get me away from my phone, not necessarily more plugged into the data stream in some fashions. On the other hand, there is something alluring about, say, being able to navigate a strange city without having to stare at a phone but to look through glasses that are showing you the navigation, but you can still look around. I can see some, there's some whiz bang stuff to that I can see is kind of interesting.
Yeah. And what's interesting about Apple's implementation is that theirs is not nearly as slim or streamlined as Google Glass is. Theirs looks much more like a full virtual reality headset. And as a matter of fact, if you want to wear it while it's not plugged into a wall, you have to have a battery pack in your pocket, and it only lasts 2 hours. So it is not meant to be portable.
Well, that's interesting. So so virtual reality is entertainment, right? So you're wearing it to play a game or something like that, or to take a tour, a virtual tour, and you're trying to block everything out. So I heard the rumble about Apple's announcement, but I actually haven't spent any time at all looking at what it is or what it looks like. So what is the use case for something like that, where it's not full immersion like virtual reality, but it's not fully portable? What is the application that Apple thinks people are going to use this for?
Yeah, so there's some levels of entertainment where they still think it's going to be used for entertainment, where one example is they have a lot of examples of it essentially becoming your TV screen, where it will project on is at some distance in front of you the image of a screen, but you can still look around if you want to and still see, oh, there's the bookcase that's next to where I normally have my TV mounted. It can also completely block out the outside world and just have the screen if you wanted to. But what some of the demos that they showed was, for example, they could show on the TV area the sports game, but then if they were highlighting a certain player in that sports game, then along the side they could have a pop-up of all of that player's stats. So you could see all of their statistics and all of their pass completions and things like that. And then they even showed for a basketball game where on the coffee table in front of the person, they would show a replay in 3D, where it looks like all of the players were 3D models that you could essentially get up and kind of look down on the field to see where those players were and see in 3D, as if you were there, what the play looked like, as if it were miniaturized on your coffee table. So,
the last part is the coolest thing so far. And it's kind of
like
Star Wars coming to life, but with probably higher quality holograms. So,
yeah. So that's part of it for entertainment. What I thought was, I think their potentially more interesting use case is that they were marketing it as something that could potentially replace your monitors, because they touted it as having different apps that could be positioned 360 degrees around you as if you had screens around you. And the way that you can interact with them is that there is essentially cameras on the outside that look at your hands, and to click, you just pinch your fingers. And from the journalists that I heard talk about their experience there, they said it was very responsive, where literally they would have, say, a Spotify window open to their side. They would look at the song that they wanted to play, literally just look at it, pinch their fingers, and then it would start playing. And so then you could have a bunch of different applications, and you could have a computer, keyboard and mouse in front of you if you wanted, but essentially that way, so you don't have to be nearly as tethered to physical computer screens as much as you would have a headset that you could move dynamically with and just look and still have like an element of reality as well, is part of what they're marketing.
That sounds more like Iron Man. So the looking part, I assume it just tracks your eyes. Is that the idea?
Yes, very sophisticated eye tracking.
Yeah, when you say things like very sophisticated eye tracking, I understand the concept of that in terms of the technological usefulness, but there's something freaky about a machine that knows where you're looking. I don't know why that all of a sudden sounds weird. So, well, it's interesting. The news story that I selected looks very similar in some ways. I think this was 4 weeks ago, but it was a TED Talk done by Imran Chaudhry. I think it's Chaudhry. I'm sure that I'm pronouncing his name incorrectly. It was titled "The Disappearing Computer: An Exclusive Preview of Humane's Screenless Tech." So what was interesting to me was that this was Imran profiling technology that was much more interactive. It was a wearable. He had like a little, almost looked like a name tag without a name on it that was on the jacket he was wearing. He would occasionally tap it and talk to it, and it would summarize, the AI would summarize different things. There are two aspects of it that were really interesting to me. The first is, honestly, the most interesting piece of AI that I've seen that is not really available now is a personal AI. Meaning that an AI that actually was programmed by me instead of by the internet. So ChatGPT is pulling from this whole huge internet data set. I think it'd be fascinating to have an AI that was pulling mostly from my own data set, and then do things like knows my schedule, knows the way I do work, and can help shortcut some of those things. I can also see the massive market potential of that. I mean, basically, you sell somebody a subscription to an AI that lives on your phone, and then you never turn that subscription off. I mean, I know this, like I bought Evernote years ago. I don't want to turn Evernote off because I have thousands of documents in Evernote. And what am I going to do with them? Just imagine what it would be like if, canceling your subscription was killing C3PO. So that part was interesting. However, what was really intriguing was the comments. The presentation was whiz bang. It was done very well. But the comments had a lot of people saying, never, I'm not at all interested in a situation where there's more people talking out loud to their phone. In other words, the kind of audible interaction with the AI struck most people as extremely annoying. And their claims were they'll never replace the keyboard because of the privacy of the keyboard. So in other words, the being able to interact with your technology without everybody else around hearing it. Now, I'm sure there's lots of interesting ways you can get around that. Probably Elon Musk would say you just implant the chip in your brain. But it was interesting, the difference between the wow on the stage and then the I thought, I mean, I just did a quick survey. I didn't scientifically go through this, but a substantial amount of comments and a clear majority saying, no, I'm not interested in that technology that makes that kind of interaction more public instead of less public. So interesting stuff.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I hadn't actually looked at the comments of that video, so that's really interesting that I hadn't thought of that. I genuinely just didn't think of that when I was looking at the presentation. I was more just curious of some of the technology behind it, but that makes a lot of sense now that I'm thinking about it, is that if I am, for example, sitting on a busy subway train and I'm wanting to ask about the weather, it's going to be much more awkward and disruptive, even though with my current smartphone, I could still actively ask it audibly about the weather for whatever destination I'm going to, but that's so much more disruptive. It's so much more awkward when you are in a train car that's full of 20 other people. Whereas, versus just pulling out your phone and tapping, it has become just much more of a socially accepted thing, at least now. Potentially in some of the earlier days of mobile phones, that was a little bit more awkward, but that's an interesting point.
And I'm the kind of person that I don't even like to have a conversation in public. I don't like to have a Bluetooth conversation in public where they can only hear my side of it. Or I prefer to be away from people and have that. Now, that's not always possible, of course, but if I had to choose, I would not. I had to do a meeting in an airport recently, and it was horrible for lots of reasons, including bad Wi-Fi. But just the whole part of being in a meeting, and then even though I was trying to talk quietly, having other people around was really frustrating. So, well, let's move off of our news stories here, David. And you had some thoughts, and so I'd like to move into a segment of the show where David had some interesting thoughts about AI, and I'm going to hear from him, and then we'll switch tables and go the other way here. So tell us what you've been thinking about recently as it comes to what are your alternative ideas when it comes to AI, David?
Yeah, so the point that I have been thinking about, especially in considering how people think about AI, is the fact that, at least my thesis is that AI is all IQ and no EQ. And that is a key difference in the fact that AI is never going to be able to truly replace humans or be like humans the way that I think some people are scared of it being. Now, the reason that I make this comparison, that I think that it works, at least in my brain, you can let me know if it doesn't, is that when you think about IQ and how intelligence quotient scores are measured, it's by our ability to analyze a problem, analyze a set of data that is in front of us, whether that's a series of numbers, a logical problem, how shapes fit together, things like that, and essentially come up with a stated solution to them. That is intelligence quotient, or just intelligence. And that is something that AI is extremely good at. That's something that AI is already much, much better than we are at doing, is recognizing patterns, recognizing logical problems, and coming up with solutions to them. What AI does not have is EQ, is emotional quotient or emotional intelligence. which is something that I think has been stressed a lot more recently. A friend of mine made the joke recently that pretty much all of the most recent best-selling business books are basically aging business executives realizing that EQ is important. So
basically, don't be a jerk. Be nice.
Seriously, that's what it seems like at the time. It's just like when you realize that people are important, then your entire outlook on business changes. It's like you didn't realize that before.
All about people at the heart of it.
Yeah, that's really concerning, actually. But regardless, the reason that I think that AI, for one thing, AI does not experience emotions the way that we do. Now, you can have AI, as we currently understand it, recreate emotional responses based on certain things. So you could have ChatGPT write an essay for you in an angry or a passionate or happy tone, and it recognizes what that looks like, what that is supposed to sound like based on what humans have put out there as happy or passionate or whatever those emotions might happen to be. But AI can't experience that. And because of that, the outputs and the way that AI processes things is going to be fundamentally different than how we as humans process things.
Would another way to say this, David, be that AI can produce those results when asked, but would not know when to apply those results? Does that differentiation make sense?
Yeah, I think to an extent.
Like you can ask it for write me an angry essay, but it wouldn't know that, if you're talking to it, it wouldn't know that it would respond to your sadness. Or it should respond with sadness, or it should respond with anger, or it should respond with, in other words, it's not going to choose an emotive response and it will only go to an emotive response if told. Is kind of a distinction at the moment.
Yeah. So I came up with an example to illustrate this. So think about this example. You are getting ready to leave the house. You get in your car. You have your keys. You are about to go run errands. You're about to go run to the grocery store to pick up something. And you get 5 minutes down the road, and then you realize that you don't have your wallet. Now, that realization is not a fun realization, and you can obviously think about how you would respond to that. But think about this. What if you're in that situation and you just came out of a really great conversation with a friend, where you had just a wonderful time with them, you really enjoyed it, and you are still just thinking about all of the fantastic things that you were able to talk about, and you're in just generally a good mood. So if you compare that experience to framing that same experience when you are coming from having just had a very long day of work, you are frustrated by the fact that a coworker is behaving in a way that you're not approving of, and things are just project isn't turning out the way that you're wanting, and you're coming into it frustrated. Both of those factors, either way that you were going into this situation, will determine how you respond when you are 5 minutes down the road and you realize that you don't have your wallet. You are going to respond drastically differently based on your state of mind and the mood and the experiences that you have had. We would all like to be able to say that regardless of the mood that we're in, we would be able to respond reasonably and then just turn around calmly, maybe a little bit annoyed, and go back and get our wallet. But the fact is, we're all human. We have those experiences that influence our logical decisions in practical scenarios. And that's something that AI is never going to be able to reproduce, because AI is never going to have a scenario where it is frustrated by a long day of work or is overjoyed by having had a life-giving conversation with a friend. It has no frame of reference as to how either of those things affect the way that you make decisions. And that, I think, is a key factor.
Yeah, that would be a key factor. Wouldn't you say, though, that most people, or a lot of people, would argue that's actually a good thing? I can hear some people say, I would love it to have an employee who didn't react in anger when they forgot their keys, or better yet, had an employee that never forgot their keys. And the employee that was predictable across the board all the time, never had emotional extremes, was never giddy, overjoyed with happiness, they didn't pay attention to customers, was never depressed, mad because they broke up with their boyfriend and didn't pay attention to customers. I think there might be some argument I think I agree with your thesis, but wouldn't there be some argument to say that that's exactly why AI is so great, is that it doesn't have emotional responses?
I think it depends on the use case that you have for it. And I think it goes to some of the conversations that you and I have had in the proper place for us to look at AI is the fact that it should just be a tool. And so it should not be something that we look to completely replace all of what a human is, which is something that I think both of us have seen, is that, AI, you're not going to be able to tell the difference between a human and an AI in certain scenarios. And I think this is a key factor of why it's different. And I think it's the reason that, for example, I would love in some aspects to have an AI as a personal assistant. I would never want to have an AI as a therapist or a pastor
or a boss
or a boss. Goodness no.
Yeah.
Goodness no. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's a pretty interesting, important distinction. But I would also say that like that is also the reason that AI won't be in charge of a world full of humans. Now, you know, you've got some disaster people who say that's why AI would eliminate the humans, and we're going to set that aside for right now. But yeah, the simple fact of the matter is, and back to your business book example, right? Like you have a lot of people who write business books and then they find out that they actually have to deal with people, and it's not inputs and outputs. There's all these other factors, and that not just taking care of a team, but actually maximizing the ability of the team is a weird alchemy of practical reality, logic, emotional intuition, praise, criticism, motivation, positive and negative reinforcement. It's a strange mix of all those things that honestly changes daily. And so, yeah, if you think of it in those terms, it is almost laughable to consider that an AI would be able to keep up or be able to do any of those things. And also that you can kind of see that there's a lot of science fiction videos, where the AI or the robot's doing the same thing over and over again, and it doesn't realize why that doesn't make any sense. And yet everybody watching the movie does. And so, yeah, I think it's a really interesting point. Well, I think coming from that, David, there's a level there where it's kind of like AI can master this sort of flat IQ, but not this hilly EQ, meaning that, if you're just trying to put logic stacked up, you can do it. So it's been a long time since I've seen any of the original Star Trek movies. I haven't seen nothing since then, but Spock's a Vulcan, right? So AI is a Vulcan. And the interesting thing about Vulcans is that Spock is an interesting counterpoint. He makes Captain Kirk more human, but he's not the main character. And so he can't ever really be the main character, at least not in human told stories. So.
Yeah, well, and to put on even more of my nerd hat here is what makes Spock a very interesting character as you find out more about his development is that he is only half Vulcan. And so he's such an interesting character because he comes from such a culture where you have to be so analytical and completely emotionless. But then there is also this human side of him that does actually feel emotion. And so the reason that he's an interesting character is that he is trying to balance these two things. And what he ultimately realizes is that both are important. And I think to a less extreme example of Spock, but I think that the idea is still true that reinforces the fact that IQ and EQ for an effective person are both important. You don't want an employee for most jobs that is all IQ and no EQ. They tend to be terrible communicators and can't actually work on a larger project. But then on the other side, having someone with all EQ and no IQ can potentially be really good and a great communicator in some aspects, but then if they don't actually have any hard skills to back it up, then they're much less useful. And so being able to find a balance between the two in a lot of roles in most areas, I would argue, is the most helpful thing.
Yeah, when you first started talking, I was thinking about that. We use a model called the personal and team triangle, and when we teach students, and it helps students characterize sort of some of their skills and move it on. And so, for example, in the personal triangle, we have a create, a connect, and a coordinate point. And we tell people all the time, you really don't want to be in the point. It's a triangle, and it's like you're going to be a dot somewhere in the middle of the triangle, which means you'd sort of trend towards 2 points and away from one. But somebody who's way out in the point, so for example, a create person who's way out in the point, yeah, that's the kind of person that is an absolute phenomenal musician, but can't market their music. Nobody likes them, and they can't balance their checkbook, and so they're living on the street. In other words, there's extreme imbalances at those ends where you can have proteges, but you often can't have people that are very functional. So you don't find, you find that most people in high positions of leadership are high EQ, not so much IQ, because those things rarely come together. So that might be an interesting sort of takeaway for us as we're thinking about AI, is that blend, it's not that humans are bags of emotions and, the robot's logical, analytical. It's that there's an alchemy, there's a blend, there's a mixing of those two that is uniquely human, but is absolutely necessary to be able to deal with the world. And so that maybe give us some perspective here when you think, AI is collectively smarter than everybody. Yeah, I know some people that are a lot smarter than I am, but they're having some real struggles because they're not able to translate their smarts into to relationships. And AI at some level is always going to have some of those issues. And so it's that blending, it's that connection that ends up being, but not just human, but absolutely essential for, again, operating in a world full of humans. If we're not operating in a world full of humans, I guess it's all kind of, not relevant anyhow. But we don't, from our worldview, I don't think that's really an issue. So,
the one way that you could put it is that AI might be smarter and more effective at us than at some certain things, but it will never be as effective at being a fully effective human as humans.
Right. And that might be a segue, David, into something I was thinking about this week. And so kind of my piece of this, which is I was at a camp over Memorial Day weekend, which is not that long ago. And I was talking to a friend, and he said something interesting, and he said something along the lines of he was studying, and I apologize. He didn't tell me the name of the book. He didn't tell me the author. He just referenced this, and I caught it, and it's kind of caught my imagination. So I don't have a source to back this up, but it seems to me the kind of story that makes logical sense. So we'll go with it a little bit here. But anyhow, this neurologist who was getting into doing brain scans, particularly in children who were using a lot of technology. And he found that, when you did a brain scan on somebody who was playing a game, that a very small part of the brain was being used. And then at a certain point, the rest of the brain atrophied. And so you had some problems there. And the way to fix that was to actually get them into the natural world. So students that were then in the natural world would find that they were able to that lots of parts of their brains would wake up and be used, and then therefore there was a bit of rehabilitative process there. Now, there's some interesting things about brain scans that is called into question their accuracy, and I have done some research on that, and so I'm not entirely sure if we want to buy that research just as it is, particularly since I don't have a source. But It did lead me down a logical chain or a pattern of thought that at some level, no matter how complicated or how involved and in-depth the game is, no matter how much the NPCs are able to interact with you because they're being driven by AI language models and all those kinds of things, you still, whether you're wearing a virtual reality set or you're looking at a screen, and I guess there's some aspect if you're wearing a virtual reality set and moving around, but for the most part, you have an extraordinary limitation on your physical senses. In other words, it's all flat, or even if it's in a very three-dimensional game or if one that you're moving through VR-wise, you're still interacting with only a small portion. That no matter how complicated that game is, it's really just pixels, right? It's still just electronic pixels. And I was thinking about that as I was walking down below my house. I live on a river, and so I was walking on the riverbank. And on a very simple walk, and in fact, David, you and I were talking on the phone, so using technology as I was doing this, I was just thinking about the fact that I'm walking down a river, which is just a very simple thing. It's not a complicated game. It doesn't require a lot of IQ. It doesn't require huge amounts of processing. And yet I was just taking a moment to catalog. It's like, The sun was beating down my left side. I could feel the coolness of the river on the right side. So there's some senses there. There were cows moving in the field, so I could listen to the cows. There's obviously the smell of the river and the smell of the grass and the smell of the cows. And so all those things, senses are coming in. I was just looking, and all of a sudden I started to pause and look. In just my short walk, I saw 40, 50 different kinds of plants. There were bugs flying around, both the kind that bite you and the kind that don't. I was listening to birds singing. I was watching birds fly across the path. I was keeping a careful eye down on the path in front of me so there weren't any snakes that I was going to step on. I was kind of keeping an eye on the river so if I could see a beaver or something else cool or a turtle or something like that. And it just struck me as to how rich the sensory input was there on what would be considered a normal walk, like not one that we would spend a lot of time thinking about, a lot of time really reflecting on. And yet there's just this enormous amount of sensory input that's causing our bodies and our brain to physically react and categorize that can never really be replaced in a kind of artificial world, artificial intelligence generated or not. And I think there's something important there, both in terms of the way to develop people. You should definitely have a connection to the physical world, but also some perspective to understand that there's going to be a lot of talk about how AI is taking over everything and AI replaces everything and AI is smarter than everything and AI controls everything. And yet, almost to the point that the most complicated AI you can imagine pales in comparison to the complexity of a short walk outside of your house, no matter where you live. Just walk down the street. You can be in suburban America or the inner city. And if you walk down the street, just the amount of information that you will take in from being in the physical world is going to make the most complicated AI very shallow by comparison in terms of just information. And that was an interesting perspective adjustment for me and something to keep in mind, especially as we're getting inundated with all this AI news that makes it sound like it's going to take over every aspect of our lives. There's probably going to be some taking over different aspects of our lives, but it still won't be anything close to the kind of richness that we'll experience in just a normal physical world. So maybe some perspective to take into this week.
Yeah. And what I think is interesting about that in considering just the point that you're making about AI and really just any sort of advanced content that you can take in through virtual reality, augmented reality, anything like that, is that it's designed to capture your attention and to keep your attention and to be as stimulating to you as possible. And whereas it's not, when you're walking out in the real world, it's not designed just to be captivating to you. Everything has its own purpose. There is life outside of your own experience. And simply the fact that life is not necessarily designed to be sensory entertainment for you. Life is designed to be life, to continue to grow and to change. And whether you live in the middle of the forest or in the middle of a city, things are changing around you, and you get to experience those as you interact with the real world. So the real world is designed to have function, and you simply function as another part of that real world. Whereas if you are consuming content in a virtual reality, it's designed specifically for you to have sensory entertainment and to be able to get all the things done. Essentially, it's about you. And I think that speaks to a bit more of a philosophical just striking of where we are in the world and just who we are as humans. And the fact that that has such a draw to us is that it makes it about us, and we don't realize the greater perspective of the fact that there is a whole creation out there for us to be a part of and to be in.
Yeah, David, that might be an excellent point to end on as we think about alternative ideas and different ways to think about this, which is, I think David had a summary point there that's really excellent, which is that AI is by nature designed to focus on you. And if you're interacting with AI, everything about AI is designed to enhance what you are doing and your thoughts and your things that you're saying and all those kinds of things. And that gives you a very warped and twisted perspective on the world. From a Christian perspective, we would say that it would give you a warped, twisted perspective on the world that looks very much like the sin of the garden. when you think that you are the end all, that you're the purpose and the meaning and all those kinds of things.
And you will become like God.
That's exactly right. Or that you can master the technology that'll make you like God, or you have a God-like figure that you can access and make do what you want. AI is going to achieve God-like knowledge on the IQ scale. And if you're the one running it, then you have this ability to manipulate God. And there would be a way to, I think there's going to be people that think like that. And so when you use AI, it may be really helpful to commit to making sure that you spend more time in situations where you are not the center of attention. That to David's point, there are things, to use philosophical words, there are things going on that have a different telos, that they have a different purpose. And those purposes may or may not include you, and that, you may not be the center of those purposes. And that reminds you that indeed you are not the center of all purposes, that while you have great, in fact, incalculable value as being one is made in the image of God, you are made in the image of something and someone else. And so it's not made in your own image. And those things can really help us then keep the technology in our lives, starting with the technology we're using right now, as well as advanced technology coming down the pike, in its proper perspective, in its proper place, which is something to be used to create, but not something to use us, and something that we have to remember is to be used for a higher purpose, and that we need to be people that are focused on a higher purpose.
So I think that a point that we are going to harp on a lot over the course of this podcast is the fact that AI is most helpful for really the world when it is viewed appropriately as very powerful, but a tool that should ultimately make us more human, not less.
Yep, that's an excellent summary. Thanks so much for joining us on this initial and inaugural episode of Alternative Ideas. We're not sure how long we're going to run this. We wanted to sort of discuss this as we were learning it ourselves. We've been having these conversations internally and Unbound, and thought it might be helpful to share some of these with you. And the purpose of doing this is to give you some tools to think about AI. And we hope that does a couple things. We hope it helps you to think about AI in a way that enables it to use it to do the work that you do, the purpose that you have, in a better way. We hope it also helps you to get some perspective on it, to know when it's dangerous and to avoid it. And maybe more than anything else, we hope that it allows you to think of AI in the context of what it means to be human, and that being human is bigger, more important, and more exciting than anything that AI is doing or will do. And that may be the strongest alternative idea of all. So thanks, and we'll look forward to talking to you next week and see what the world of AI brings us then.
And I'll also add on the end here that if you are watching this on YouTube as a full episode or a clip, thank you for watching through. If you have any thoughts about this that we didn't end up covering, leave a comment down below. We will absolutely be reading them, and we would love to potentially incorporate some of the input that you guys have in the audience into what we're talking about as we move forward.